according to the number, verse 34. According to the number of your days, which you have spied out the land, 40 days, and every day you shall bear your guilt a year. Do you know what God was saying? It took you 40 days to spy out that land that I told you that I was going to take you into. Add a year for each day. That's how long I'm going to keep your butt running in circles until you come back to me. God hasn't changed. He hasn't changed. Now, here's where it is. Many professing Christians today believe that God has changed, and He wouldn't do that. Ontologically, we see that His nature is exactly the same. Verse 35, He says, I, the Lord, have spoken, surely this I will do to all this. Look what He calls the church back in that day. Evil congregation, wicked congregation, who are gathered against me. Because God says, no, this is personal. This is personal. In this wilderness they shall be destroyed, and they shall die. Now you can read the other verses, 36 through 39. Oh no, I want to read verse 39. And then Moses spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, and look what happened. The people mourned greatly. They mourned greatly. Get that door from Mother Son so she won't trip when she comes in with her umbrella. Thank you. So we see something very important in this lesson. There's another lady coming in right behind. We see something very important in this lesson. That God, ontologically, the nature of God is that don't play me off. I want some, you know, Sean does this a couple of times when he preaches. Why is it so easy for us as American Christians to be that way? Why is it easy for us to be that way about God? Well, why is it easy, Cedric, for us? Isn't it a little bit more than unbelief? How about this? How about this? How about if I had $2.5 million in my bank account, and then I read this? What would be my disposition about God? If I had $2.5 million, Bob, in my bank account, and if I had a house overlooking Malibu, oh Bob, all glass house, white, standing in the living room drinking a cup of coffee this morning, watch the waves come in and the rain, and I could go out and stand on my patio in the sand and drink my coffee and breathe the fresh air and call me on my cell phone, and yes, and I go back in my house and I could sit down and turn on my music and just, and I read this. How would I feel about God? Come on, tell me the truth, church.
It doesn't apply to you.
You did it on your own.
It doesn't apply to you. Yeah.
Disassociation. Disassociation. See? Now, we know, because this is what the secularists would tell you. These people back in Moses' day were agrarian, is that the term? Agricultural? Yes, they were agrarian people. They were not people that lived in the city. They did not, their lives and their mindset was quite different from ours, man. Quite different from ours. And God had, come on, man. You better look at that. Oh, I'm serious when I say this. Don't think that the Paramount version of the Ten Commandments is a joke. That's why they made that movie, and they played that movie, the Ten Commandments, more than any other movie. Because that was basically the way it was. God literally did that. If you mention that to people today, they would say, you've got to be a fool if you believe that. But, man, they escaped the land of Goshen in Egypt. And Pharaoh's army, historically, you can read about it in the archives of Egypt, was destroyed and drowned in the sea. It is in their writings. And so these things took place. We know that historically. But we are living in a day and age now where people do not necessarily believe that, because we have a lot of stuff. We have a lot of stuff. And the more stuff we have, we believe that. This is what I want to find out about God. The closer I get to the grave and the worse my body feels, I wouldn't feel the same way about God if I had a lot. Here's how you know that you don't know anything about God. If you got a lot, you feel the same way about God today when you have nothing. You feel it when you have a lot. Because ontologically, he is not changing. Spurn me with contempt and rebel against me. God had given them abundant evidence, and look how they repaid him. Look at Moses' response to all of this. He put self aside and allowed God's holy name to be revived. In other words, I want you to understand that Moses pleaded with God on the behalf of his great character. Moses says to God, don't do this thing to them. Because a preacher is always looking at the people saying, they don't understand you the way that I understand you. If it's one thing that the preacher knows, Moses knew, Joshua knew, that's why Joshua took over when Moses died, that God's ontological nature, his essence, he had to fulfill what he said that he would do. Now, answer freely, class, and don't be afraid to do this, because people over the internet have to hear and answer loud. Do you think God was fair in rendering this judgment on his own people if they trick-bagged him after he had brought them out of that great deliverance? Do you think that that was fair?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so it's justifiable then.
Right.
It's justifiable. God delivers them from Egypt and brings it and gives them all of that. Wait. They all watched Pharaoh and his army drown.
Right.
They look back when the last Israelite came on shore and Moses holding that cane up, and God told him, now drop that cane. Because Moses wasn't controlling the water. God was. The people's focus was on the preacher. And look, God's character is so holy. What happened to Moses? Well, did he get into the promised land?
No.
He didn't even get in. He brought him through. And everything God told Moses to do, God told Moses, you would do everything I told you to do by the numbers. Don't you? After they had crossed the sea, the people got to grumbling against God. Moses took it personally. This is where I sin, Mark. I took it personally. That's why when the doctor told me in the hospital, Trent, when I had my heart attack, he said, you preaching, the Jewish doctor told me that. Because they read the Old Testament. They know. He said, you know, Pastor John, you're not supposed to listen to those people. Because God is speaking to you. He said, you listen to the people and you let the people get to you, and you let the people give you a heart attack. I think that's where the old pastor lost it. Because he had all this stuff coming in on him about all that. And he should have taken the loss and walked.
Right.
And based upon what you told me, he should have taken the loss and walked. But when you listen to the people, and you let the people do that to you, then God will allow that to kill you. Just like Moses didn't get into the promised land, certain people's lives are cut short because they do not ontologically know what God is saying. This is very, very important. So, the fulfillment is seen in, let's look at the fulfillment of what God promised them. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 14 and 15 in the Old Testament. You need a Bible, don't you, young man? Wonderful. I got one over here for you. Oh. Deuteronomy chapter 2. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. And we're going to see what God did. This is very interesting scripture. Now the time that it took for us to come, okay, from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed over the brook Zared was 38 years. Look at this. 38 years they've been wandering in the wilderness until all the generation of the men of war perished. In other words, God wiped out Israel's entire army within the camps as the Lord had sworn to them. 38 years after God had made that statement. See, God's not in a rush. God is not in a hurry to do that.